Welcome to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast, where we explore the future and what this means for your leadership. We ask the big questions. What's happening on the horizon? What does this mean for us? And most importantly, what skills do I need now for leadership of the future? It's time to explore. Let's go.
Hey, it's Zoe. Have you been thinking about the future of humanity, the future of the planet, the future of your business, the future of technology? Well, my guest today has been doing some very big thinking for a very long time about all those things. He's written an amazing book, which I absolutely adore and think it's fantastic, well-researched, absolutely fabulous. It's called The Rise of Techno-Socialism. My guest today is Brett King. Apart from being a best-selling author of multiple books, he is also a global keynote speaker on everything to do with the future of technology and humanity. He is a podcaster. He is the host of Breaking Banks and also the co-host of one of my favorite podcast shows, The Futurists, which has gone gangbusters since it launched about a year ago. And he's just an amazing human, very smart, very intelligent, and we have an amazing conversation about what the future is unfolding before us and what we can do to steer it in a direction that serves all of humanity. So without further ado, here is Brett. Welcome to the show, all the way from North Carolina, drumroll, Brett King.
North Crackalacka, as we call it here. That's the Australian version of North Carolina.
Crackalacka.
North Crackalacka. I've been here just about a year. Well, not quite a year. I spent 12 years in New York before that, and then before that Dubai for 5, and then before that Hong Kong for 6. I left Australia in 99, so I guess that's what you call a global citizen these days, right?
Absolutely.
Digital, the original digital nomad, right?
Yeah. You're well before your time in many things as a futurist. Which part of the planet do you like the most?
Well, Katie, my wife, is also a futurist, so we chose Thailand as our sort of destination for quality of life. So we spend 6 months a year in Thailand these days, and we have a place on the river in Bangkok. So, and it's close. I've got kids in Australia still, so, it's close to for them to visit and so forth as well. But, you're an hour from the best beaches in the world. You've got fantastic healthcare. They have a healthcare tourism industry there now. It's a great travel hub. So, it's got a lot of pluses.
Well, that sounds
food is amazing.
The food, yes, it is. I love Thai food. So sounds like a fabulous present, and you're a futurist. How did you get into the world of futurism?
Well, actually, I started writing a science fiction novel when I was younger, like in my 20s. It was about the Martians trying to get independence from the Earth system and what became of the CIA and United Nations basically try to stop it. And, it revolves around some unique rocket technology. But anyway, I never got that published. And then, as I got into my career, there was obviously more of a call. I found people just were really bad at anticipating the impact of technology organizationally, in denial, really. And then I started studying that effect in terms of technology trends and so forth. And I always felt that I had a good handle on what was coming in 10, 15, 20 years. And I'd been fairly good with my predictions in business about that. So I just started to, it's short-term sci-fi, the stuff that I do really is that's how I think about it. And so more of sort of applying that future world thinking to business scenarios and so forth. And then that took me down the path of writing as a futurist in the banking space, and then more generally as a general futurist, over the last decade or so. And that's been phenomenally amazing. I've just had such a wonderful time. It's like getting paid and traveling around the world to talk about stuff I'm really interested in. It's not a bad job if you can get it.
It is. It's a fabulous job, and you've done a fabulous work with it. And I want to highlight one of your books, which is The Rise of Techno-Socialism, which I loved. It's fantastic. It's thorough. It's detailed. It's so well researched. And it's such an important book. And I'm so delighted you agreed to come on the show to talk about it and the future. And you're right. I think one thing that hasn't changed is that people are still in denial, even with so many changes happening around us. I think it's difficult for people to get their heads around what could happen. You're right. It's so difficult to forecast. So let's start with the big idea. What is technosocialism?
So it's not classic socialism. It's not Marxism. Marxist theory is around the dictum of the workers owning the means of production, right? Technosocialism could best be described as the citizens owning the wealth of the economy, or the means of the economy. So instead of focusing on, the sort of economics metrics that we have for economies today, GDP growth, full employment numbers and so forth, we're instead looking at the economy as a tool to solve the problems of citizens first and foremost, and then secondarily contribute to corporate and market-based priorities, especially as artificial intelligence and climate change start to impact this sort of realignment of, the economy serving the citizenry first and foremost before the markets is really critical if we're going to sort of combat the effects of climate change and, understand the implications of AI sort of detaching human capital and human labor from classic demand and supply economics. So that's sort of the view of technosocialism. But technosocialism is one of 4 outcomes that we map out in the book as potential models. We just sell the book as a sales pitch for what we term as technosocialism, essentially.
Well, it's a better version of the future than the other models.
Right. But we do look at, the other models in a more negative fashion because particularly, sort of the neo-feudalist system that's emerging in the US as an example. Our position in the book is that if this form of capitalism continues, it likely will mean the extinction of the human species, which is pretty...
Wow. That's a massive statement. And terrifying.
Problematic.
So, one of the biggest challenges in the book, I think, and I'd love to get your perspective on that. I think, if I read it correctly, you theorize that these existential threats, which are not so existential but more real, climate change, pandemics, inequality, will force people to change their perspective on democracy and on capitalism, as you mentioned just then.
Right.
Do you really think people can change their values like that? Like, value system change is quite a big epic for an individual and for a whole society, even bigger. So if you've got the keys to that, I want to know. So tell me about that.
Well, the key is time, right? It's going to happen. It's just what has to happen in order for us to make this transition. Is it one where we mature as a species, we grow up because of the crises that we face and we realign sort of our philosophies as a species, which that's what we hope will happen with all of these things that are going to happen, or we don't. And then there's a question of whether we can learn the lesson in time. But historically speaking, we're not in the Victorian era anymore in terms of our sensibilities and our understandings. So, science and, what we learn about the universe and the world naturally changes things, as well as, human behavior tends to morph and trend around various factors, affluence of people, economic factors, healthcare options, education options, things like that, all contribute to this sort of forward march in terms of society's progress. But capitalism is a pretty sticky idea. And, there's going to be a lot of people treat it like a religion in the United States. When you start attacking capitalism, it's like, oh no, you can't attack capitalism. It's the best system we've got. And it's like, well, yeah, but in 10,000 years, is it going to be the best system we've got? And if the answer to that is no, why can't we try and find a a better way around it today, because arguably we wouldn't have climate change if it were not for capitalism. We wouldn't necessarily have inequality the way we do today without capitalism. It's a feature of capitalism, not a bug, as they say. Of course, other systems, like Churchill would have argued it's the best system we've got until something better comes along. But we can now start to think and ideate on what could be better and design that, particularly with the impact of AI, which is going to require us thinking about ethics, in different ways. It's going to require us rethinking the way government works because of, high levels of automation. It's going to change the role of the economy, particularly, corporations based on high levels of artificial intelligence. We've got all the ingredients for this sort of philosophical shift that we're due for in terms of pure history.
I agree with that. In fact, if we take a leadership maturity developmental model and apply it to what we're seeing now, the shift from individual to collective is the next swing in our Western culture. And because
it has to happen. Yeah, it has to happen.
It has to happen.
And I'll tell you why. Well, it's the only moral choice, and I tell you why, is that climate change is going to produce, and the estimates are very broad, between 300 million and 1.6 billion eco-refugees. These are people displaced by sea level rise, food scarcity, flooding, bushfires, natural disasters, and so forth by 2050. And so if you think of this in pure capitalism terms today, we would say, great, well, who's going to pay for that? Right? And if you ask that question at the scale of 1.6 billion eco-refugees, if you're arguing over the ROI of that, then you're missing the point of what humanity is for. And there is not an economic cost that is anywhere viable to say that 1.6 billion people should lose their lives in favor of profits of companies. That's not a rational thought. And so if you wind that back, there is some point in this climate disaster with these eco-refugees that has to by nature happen, because it's unthinkable that we would let 1 billion people die because we can't figure out how to pay for something, when we've got the resources and the means to solve the problem. We certainly have the technical means and the technical, solutions to that as a problem. It just needs the political will, I guess.
Well, I think it could go one of two ways, because I saw at the beginning of the pandemic opportunity to push us into this collectivist thinking. And to a certain degree, that did happen with the collective focus on getting the jab sorted out. And yet there was still huge amounts of protectionism that erupted as well.
Yes, you're right. Well, this is why, ultimately, if you ask me which outcome is likely to happen, technosocialism or neo-feudalism, the Ladistan scenario, which we see a lot of at the moment, trying to ban GPT-5 development and things like that, and the Faldistan scenario, I would say probably it's going to come down to the planned future scenarios, which is the technosocialism versus neo-feudalism, because the markets are going to continue to push AI, and ultimately that's why you'll see massive development of AI that will be disruptive in the other elements, and climate change is already happening. So then you've got those two outcomes, technosocialism or neo-feudalism. And, pretty much every futurist and science fiction author that I speak to about this says it's about 50-50.
50-50. God, we got to push it in the better direction.
I know. That's what I'm trying to do, right?
Yeah, I hear you. And it's an important vision. I want to talk about some of the challenges to that, and largely it's still around values and worldview. So if we're looking at the individual, how do we help people move from individual focus to collective focus? And you've showcased, well, we can't let 1 billion people die is one rationale towards that. The question I have for you is, what do people need to give up, in your point of view, to let go of that individual focus, capitalistic focus, to embrace a collective one?
Well, if we are trying to figure out a way forward, what we're trying to say is we value the whole, humanity as a whole over the individual. And that requires that we lose this conceptualization of life like it's an Olympic sport and there are winners and losers, right? That the best way for everybody to win and have the best future and best outcome is if we focus on making life better for every human simultaneously, because that will create many advances that are a net benefit to not just humans, but other species on the planet and so forth. Whereas if we are saying, well, you get what you work for and, you need to pull yourself out by your bootstraps, and that sort of thinking runs into this brick wall of automation, is we're making a ton of money out of AI. The markets are flourishing, record stock markets, because of the wealth that AI is creating. But in the process of doing so, we're removing humans out of the workforce at the fastest rate we've ever seen technological change impact the labor market. Now, the internet was disruptive, but it created new jobs that sort of filled the gap over time. But with AI, we're attacking many different types of work, including white-collar work, all across multiple industries simultaneously. And that's something that we've never really seen happen before. So we expect higher levels of unemployment. So if you have this, you got to pull yourself up by your bootstraps approach to life, that runs into a brick wall. If we can't get people work because, the markets are demanding more and more automation, then you have to change your view of how wealth distribution occurs in the economy. You can no longer say people only should be rewarded if they work, because, that's maybe never going to be viable again. Not in the way we think of work today. So, this is sort of ultimately my view of why we have to have that conversation, and, the logic to argue through why, if you take that position today, it can only be on a short-term basis, that it doesn't have a long shelf life.
Okay. So
does that answer your question?
It does. So it means that we're losing the idea of the self-made man/woman/human, as well as the pull yourself up by the bootstraps ethos. So
right. But I tell you what we get instead, which is really exciting, right, is that once we have a, universal basic income infrastructure, or whether when we have these highly automated societies with high quality education and healthcare and so forth, maybe even longevity treatments, at the extreme end, things like that, we are starting to wrestle with climate. We're living more sustainably as a system. But here's the thing, is that when you don't have to worry about getting paid to survive, and when that basic need is filled by the economy, because there's so much wealth that's been created by these technological advances, that we can now afford to give everyone a roof over their head. We can actually do that today cheaper than letting someone live on the streets homeless. We can give them better healthcare than they have today at a fraction of the cost of what it costs us in government terms today, right? Because of those advances. And then that means that you as an individual, you can do whatever you are passionate about. You don't have to do a job that is just what you have to do to make ends meet anymore. That is not how work works in the evolved 21st century. You work with what you're passionate about. So that, I think, is a positive arc.
I'm wondering about the myth that's needed for people to help move into that. So we're abandoning the personal achievement myth in some contexts, the struggle and
the economic metrics of that, you could still say, you could say, like, how do you change the lives of 1 billion people? That could be your purpose now, right? Instead of, I want to have $5 million in my bank account.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I don't know.
I know, but I'm looking for the question I'm searching for is, so we have this myth of the self-made human. And then if we're going to replace that with, you can then spend your time and energy on something you're passionate about. What's the myth that accompanies that? Is it, is it save humanity hero myth? Is it something else? What have you got in mind for that?
Be all you can be.
Oh, geez, that is... that was so cheesy. I can't... No. I reject that one.
Okay. No, I think, the way what we termed it as in the book was optimal humanity. that this is the optimal way for the human species to evolve, in terms of the fact that what it does collectively is now we have a collective mission. Instead of competing against each other, which is the way we have it today, on a national level, nation against nation, economically, in terms of militarily, at the corporation level, in the markets, corporations against other corporations, geographies versus geographies, and people versus people. Instead of thinking like that, let's compete for the future of humanity. Let's compete to accelerate these advances, to explore, the universe, to learn new things. I think that's what I get excited about. But I know some people are uncomfortable with this as well. Some people are quite happy, as we've seen in recent political times. People really harken back to the good old days and don't want change to happen as rapidly as it is. And so, they might not be as excited about the advancement of the species because it comes with technological and cultural changes. But that's, ultimately the future is coming, and it's just a question of whether we, is this the right time to realign human purpose with, the problems that we have as a species that we're going to have over the next 20 to 30 years.
Hey, it's Zoe. If you're enjoying these leadership insights, join us in the Amplifiers Academy. It's bite-sized leadership development through self-paced videos and exercises, templates, checklists, resources, and an online community to connect with other leaders. It's Amplifiers Academy, your gateway to better, stronger leadership. See you there. I want to ask about cryptocurrency, just as a massive shift in topic.
Sure.
And it's going from big picture purpose of human work and human nature to a technical thing. So with blockchain and cryptocurrency, I can see the possibilities and potential of transparency and security around it. What needs to happen to make it ubiquitous and adapted across all countries? Because I was having this conversation over dinner with my husband last night. He's like, it needs to be backed up by gold. I'm like, I don't think that Brett would agree with that. So I wanted to ask
given that the US dollar isn't backed up by gold, anymore, and hasn't been since the 1970s, and, a lot of people trust it, there's a case in point that that's not necessary. But the short answer is the smart world requires smart contracts to run. And those smart contracts require a digital form of money, whether that is a crypto, stablecoin, tokens, or central bank digital currencies. And that is a precursor of smart economies that are going to compete in the 21st century. Thus, we would expect in this environment that you would now start to have money built for purpose. In various instances, in the case of cross-border trade on a wholesale basis, will most likely be central bank digital currencies. But for retail application on a cross-border basis, it could be crypto, it could be tokens, it could be anything, because eventually the AI won't care what denomination a transaction is, your AI wallet. It'll just say, all right, I'll work out what you've got in this value store and figure out how to pay for that item, right? And so that'll all happen instantly, automatically, in the cloud. But I think that programmability aspect of money and what that means in terms of the way we trust money in the future, that the value of money is not going to be just a transactional value, but its core utility. So what it enables you to do, and whether it is carbon neutral, whether it is sustainable in nature, whether there are good ethics behind the use of that money, they could all come into consideration of the design of money for the future world. And they could just be, new versions of geographical currencies we have at the same time. We know already there's yuan, the most advanced central bank digital currency in the world is the Chinese yuan right now. The US may follow, they may be forced to. We have, other nations working, the BRIC nations working on sort of common payment platforms and things like that. So the modality of the way money is going to work is probably, we're seeing the start of that, evolution now. And it really comes down to sort of programmability and what those systems are required to do. There's not going to be one global central currency. If anything, we're going to, we may have currencies for machines. Machines may have value stores. They may have to pay for energy access and things like that. We may build them out on a time basis. So, it may make sense to have, a currency or tokens of time rather than currency in the way we think of it today. So there's going to be a lot of changes there. We're going to have machine identities so that they can transact. This is all very interesting from a design perspective. But what it means is you need digital money. That's pretty clear.
Okay. So if I've understood correctly, basically it's about the issue about adoption of cryptocurrency is one tiny sliver of a bigger, broader design principle about how we're going to exchange value. That's
my argument, yeah. The crypto element, I think you will have the crypto argument that, you do have independence, self-sovereignty over your money and your identity in that system. I think that will have some strong, credence to it in the world that comes, particularly where central bank digital currencies could be used to, quite heavily control the way you use money, for example. And as an argument for the prevention of money laundering, as an example, well, if you're given universal basic income, you can't use it on these goods or services, for example, so you could have, in the south of the States, if they pay to UBI, you can't use it for, drugs or prostitution, but you can buy a gun with universal basic income funds, I don't know.
Important essentials.
Don't call me cynical.
So a lot of people would just based on just what you just said there would be like, oh my God, all the control of our society that's going to happen as a result of this. Are we giving up freedoms in order to have these
freedoms? Yeah.
Yeah.
We're giving up one set of freedoms in order to have another set of freedoms. And, the freedom we lose in terms of identity and so forth, in classic terms today, and anonymity, and the use of cash so it can't be traced, for example. In return for that, yes, we are going to give up an element of control, but many of us have already done that with the smartphone and the way we use our smartphone every day and how we're reliant on it and the fact that it's a tracking device for anybody that has access to the credentials, as an example. So, we do adapt to these things over time and seem intelligent enough to make trade-offs. Well, I get the benefit of this supercomputer in my pocket, which I can also use for phone calls. And that's, worth the implications of the tracking and the facial recognition and all of those other things. We may do the same in autonomous societies where we say, well, we've got better water quality. We're not starving like some other nations that haven't adopted these systems are. Energy is basically free now that we've shifted to these renewable systems. My health is better. I can expect to live to 130 years old. I've got anything I could ever need. I don't have to worry about an income over my, to put a roof over my head for my kids. I don't have to worry about their education in the future. So there's trade-offs, and it's just a matter of deciding whether those trade-offs that I just mentioned are worth losing some control in terms of identity and sort of cash flow control,
The way that you sell it, it's like, sign me up yesterday.
Well, that's the argument, right?
Yeah, a good sales pitch.
Well, I think it's ultimately very much a beast of logic. And so I try and develop these, with my speaking and writing, I'm trying to develop this logical train of thought. I provide you all the evidence you need. And at the end, I hope that the conclusion is almost automatic, that it's almost unavoidable, that it makes the most sense. But obviously, some people would say I'm biased. I have a technology bent, and I'm techno-optimist, and that's sometimes naive, So there's that.
Consciously naive for the sales pitch of optimism, I think, is acceptable. I do have a question about adaptability, though. Adaptability, one of the things you said that we need to prioritize in education of children, well, probably of all humans, is this idea of adaptability. The way that I conceive of adaptability, it's one step beyond resilience. Resilience is just tolerating and being able to cope with change. Adaptability means leaning into it and sucking it up and changing as a result. How do you propose we go about encouraging or teaching people how to be adaptable?
So I think climate is going to produce a huge amount of institutional stress. I think we see already the dissatisfaction with the politics, not just around climate, but just generally in terms of social policy and so forth. We see people, that they instinctively know that what's coming in terms of economic uncertainty, what's going to happen with employment changes and climate. I think people instinctively feel that. And that's why we've seen a ballooning in protests around the world, 1,000% increase in the attendance of protests globally in the last 20 years. And so we know that this increased uncertainty is going to come. But if you're thinking about that institutional stress element and how people are going to cope with that, then we really have to show people to have sort of a different response to this, which is, sort of giving them a confidence or basis that there is technical solutions to these problems. This is just a matter of collective will. And so let's get together and figure out the best way forward to fix this, and so this requires constant adaptation over the next 20 to 30 years because of the rate of change. Not only are we going to have, massive improvements in, massive technological advancements with AI and, various devices, autonomous vehicles driving us around and things like that. Technological advances in terms of food production, in terms of medicine, in the way we build, architecture, all this sort of stuff. A lot of really interesting advances. But this requires sort of that, to take advantage of that, it takes a mindset of, well, I want to be a part of this change. I want to define how this change impacts society, how I want to learn what this is going to mean for me so that I can figure out my own personal strategies. So that's sort of the culture that I hope that this world brings, because, I do argue in the book that when we argue over artificial intelligence, for example, and there's a lot of this going on right now, maybe we should slow the progress of AI. It could lead to misinformation and so forth. Maybe we should halt the development of AI for 6 months. Right? That's the recent letter that came out with these professionals. And that's fine, but in 6 months, we still have the problem. And, we're not going to stop on our quest to produce artificial general intelligence. And even if we don't get to AGI, which I think we will, but even if we don't, AI is still going to be massively impactful. That's sort of really the wrong question or the wrong approach. It is, a 6-month pause doesn't really materially impact the outcomes around AI. It's certainly not going to slow down Chinese development of artificial intelligence. So instead, what we need to be doing is creating guide rails for the impact of AI in society. But this is where you come back to the adaptability. Because if we spend time arguing if AI should happen, when it's definitely going to happen, that's a waste of time. Instead, we should be saying, how is it going to impact society and how can we mitigate the risks of the negative impacts of that on society? And the only way we can do that is some sort of building consensus-based ethics frameworks for the ethical operation of artificial intelligence. That requires us to get some consensus on things like ethics. So when we start talking about adaptability, it can be actually fairly broad, not just about your own individual adaptability from a career perspective or, the lifelong learning principles that you'll be able to enjoy in this sort of new, smart ecosystem. But what position you should be taking on some fairly fundamental ethical choices in terms of where AI should be allowed to operate and where they shouldn't. Should AI be able to be in charge of weapons of mass destruction? Should an AI be able to kill a soldier in a conflict? These are ethical questions, not technological ones.
It's interesting how the conversation has circled back again to ethics. We talked about the ethics in terms of changing worldviews, and that's got to underpin our choices. And it's, as you're just discussing this idea around adaptability, our guarding points is around ethics and our values. Maybe that's in the part of the answer is if we're going to be teaching our children adaptability, we need to be having strong discussions about ethics and values. And what it means to be human and what's the future of humanity. Those are huge, important questions, which we haven't actually discussed globally for a long time, I don't think.
Yeah.
It's sort of
No, I think we did during the Nuremberg trials, Yeah, the Nuremberg trials was probably the last time we had that sort of, and we have started some of it through climate, but not in AI. There's no global conference on AI that is, WHO or UN type of construct. There should be. Regulation on AI needs to be global. And so I would expect the Davos crowd to sort of lead this, but they haven't as yet. And part of that is, we have seen efforts at ethics in Microsoft and Google come to sort of a screaming halt recently. And the question is, well, why? Why is Google and Microsoft, booted out their ethics boards in both cases?
Why did they? Why?
Well, this is a very interesting question. And the question is twofold. One, it's very hard to get consensus on ethics to be able to code that. And secondly, it does put a constraint on the technical development. So, they're most likely the answers, but I can't say with any authority because I haven't spoken to the localized teams on it.
Oh my God, that's a mystery I want solved. I want to find out what's going on with that. That's scary. And all right, big important questions. I want to bring it down to brass tacks now for the leaders of small to medium enterprises. So the CEO of a not-for-profit organization that's listening to our conversation, or the CEO of a construction company, or a CEO of an agriculturally based production company. What are they going to do with this stuff? So we're talking about the future of humanity. What can they do to make it practical and real for them today?
So the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to be going through this phase of essentially iteration of many of the businesses we have, augmenting human activity and business activity with the use of AI to make the company more efficient, more profitable, and so forth. This is obviously going to change the way we hire workforce and so forth. We're going to need a lot more technical skills initially. And, we are going to be replacing some analytical parts of the business. Like classic examples of this are lawyers, doctors, accountants, that a lot of the grunt work will be done. And if you want to stay in those businesses, you have to be able to work with AI in producing outcomes. And so it's man plus machine. This is this phase of activity we're entering. The first thing is everybody really needs to be a technologist to be successful in business in the future, because in the next phase, and, for conceivably for the eternity of future commercial operations, you're going to have to be figuring out the technical approach or the technology you will use to execute on your business. Okay,
that makes sense. It's like everybody open up ChatGPT and start playing around. It's a starting point.
Well, yeah, and I think that's a good starting point. Again, hiring younger kids who are digital natives and are willing to learn about this, learning yourself, putting yourself through machine learning programs and things like that, the adaptability again, that's what it's going to take to be successful. Now, there will be legacy business for some time. For example, fossil fuel industry is not going to disappear. We're still going to need mechanics. We're still going to need tires manufactured and someone to put those on and so forth. But taxi drivers are probably not long for this world. And there are, changes going to happen there. So it'll be in fits and starts, but the key adaptability from a business perspective is man plus machine. And if you get in that mindset of how am I using this tech to make this business better and be competitive, then you'll be fine. It'll have implications from an employment perspective, but that's something we already got to take into consideration anyway, regardless. So.
Okay. Great. Well, I want to finish off with a couple of personal questions that'll indulge my science fiction interests, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
Why didn't you publish your sci-fi book?
I might still, but it's funny. I would have to rewrite it because there's stuff in there now that the future has changed, and this is a problem that sci-fi authors regularly face now. Is if you read Joe Haldeman or something where they talk about an e-fax, because that was they didn't even have email back then, and things like that. Some of these technologies you can miss. So I missed the emergence of smart glasses, on my bingo card, back then, because that was in, I don't know, it was probably 1998, something like that, 97 when I wrote that. Yeah, it was a long time ago. But I did try to get it published, but I didn't really understand the publishing industry like I do now. And I think I could get it published easily today. But I'm actually working on an alternate sci-fi piece, which is I'm looking at a 10-part TV series, science fiction TV series. But it's sort of starts 3,500 years in the past. And then goes through to 3,000 years in the future, theoretically, right? So it's sort of pretty interesting. It's called The Interventionists, and it's basically the story about the fact that there is this galactic, union of civilizations, and they have a very strict non-interference policy, like the Prime Directive from Star Trek. But that at periods of time in Earth's history, there have been interventions. And so it's the story of those interventions. So, for example, if you don't mind, I'll tell you, the first episode starts off with the Tower of Babel story, And so if you're familiar with the biblical mythology around the Tower of Babel, you have this King Nimrod, and, he's in opposition to God, and God decides to confuse the languages of people, because otherwise they'd be able to achieve anything. This is the argument in Genesis. And so that's the Tower of Babel is where the confusion of the languages comes from. So I have a sci-fi alien sort of plot to that, which is this investigator is sent down because there's been some anomalous progress made in this town of Uruk, this city on Earth with aqueducts and legal systems and monetary systems emerging very rapidly. And so they suspect there might be, alien intervention. So he comes down to check it out, and he's cloaked and, in disguise and stuff, and checking out this, Stone Age civilization. And, there's the announcement that Nimrod's coming back to town. So he hides out in the temple at the top of the ziggurat, the pyramid. And when Nimrod walks in, Nimrod can see him even though he's cloaked, because Nimrod's an alien, right? So they have this firefight, but the agent, not wanting to corrupt the local timeline, says he instructs his AI to build a chemical compound to wipe their memory so that they won't remember what's happened. And that has the side effect of affecting the language centers. So that's how the series starts. So.
Oh, that's really cool. I like that.
Anyway.
Well, I like that as an idea, interventionists in the progress of humanity, because we're kind of looking at that now, right?
Yeah,
that's what
exactly.
We've been talking about. What's the interventionist, what kind of interventions do we need to do right now for the future of humanity? I love it.
Right.
I look forward to watching that, Brett. Mm-hmm. Love it. Last question, sci-fi one. Have you got a favorite sci-fi writer?
Yeah, I mean, probably a couple. I grew up with Arthur C. Clarke, and he was, a real science element of science fiction. I count amongst my friends now Kevin J. Anderson and David Brin, and I think they're both wonderful authors. I read them widely before I became friends with them. But I'm also a big fan of Kim Stanley Robinson. I think probably is the best sci-fi writer when it comes to climate change that we have amongst us today. Really brilliant guy. And also, a lot of the ideas that I put into Technosocialism come from the early work that he'd done. So shout out to KSR.
Did you like his latest book, Mystery for the Future?
Scary, but
scary, yeah.
Look, it was harder work than some of his other books. Like this Mars trilogy, just is world class. And generally the work he's done in the climate future has been interesting. But obviously, some of this was almost policy, in terms of the Ministry of the Future as a book, but certainly really gets people thinking.
It does.
And, the need to build a global carbon currency to be able to tackle this on a long-term basis, I think that is a very valid argument, should definitely be discussed. You see some of it inbuilt in the world around him, but you don't see the world of AI is not as upfront as you would have in other science fiction stories necessarily, like culture series and things like that, with Ian Banks.
All right. Well, thank you for sharing that. Where can people find out more about you and your work and all the fabulous things that you do?
Sure. brettking.com is my personal website. And then, I'm on LinkedIn as a platform, Twitter, at Brett King on Twitter, obviously, Facebook. So, they're good ways to keep in touch with me. But, a little bit of Instagram. But, generally social media is a pretty decent way to stay in touch.
Awesome. Brett, this has been wonderful. I've really enjoyed our conversation. I love the optimism that you bring to the thoughts on the future and what we can actually do as a species to make it all okay and better. So thank you so much for sharing your insights and wisdom.
Hashtag optimal humanity.
Okay. Optimal humanity. Got it. I really enjoyed that conversation with Brett. Whenever I listen to him speak or read his work, I am left with my head exploded with the possibilities and potential of where we could go as a species. And Brett's techno-optimistic view of the world is very encouraging. So these are the key takeaways for me and for you, and my encouragement for what you can do next in order to progress your leadership when leading into the leadership of the future. The first thing is a big reflective piece, and to really dig into what your personal values and ethics are. What kinds of decisions are you making, and what are the values and principles that are guiding those? And I think, as Brett suggested, when we dig into that, then that will help us really make positive choices in the future around artificial intelligence, machine learning, and our changing world. And will also help us be more adaptable, because if we know what the values and principles are behind all of our actions, it makes it easier for us to make smart choices. So that's number one. Number two, go ahead and Google automation in whatever industry you're in and see what comes up. What are the opportunities for you to get on board with the different automations, robotics, etc., that are already happening in your industry? And likewise, Google artificial intelligence in whatever sector you're in and see what pops up and see what's emerging there that you can take advantage of or follow up or research a little bit more. And the third takeaway is to read Brett's book, The Rise of Techno-Socialism. It is a big picture view, a very solid assessment of where we've been and where we might go and what we need to do in order to choose a more positive future than the ones that we might end up falling into. If more of us do that, more of us espouse the changes that we want to see in the world instead of just reacting, then we're heading for a better future. And that's what I want for you, and that's what I want for all of us too. So in the meantime, live well, lead well.
You've been listening to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast. To find out more about leadership of the future or to contact Zoe, go to zoerouth.com.